You know what happens? As we temporarily alter some elements of any model, intriguing, illuminating insights can emerge. You know how engineers do that now with computers? Or people in finance? They build a financial model, or they build a technological model. And they say, you know what, let's change this element. What if we change factor X and put this other factor in there? What does it do to the entire model? And so they may say, what if we put this column here? What does it do to the structure? And what other changes do we need to make? And so out of that kind of thing, they're able to tinker with reality without having to run the risk of doing it in real life. It saves a lot of money, a lot of risk, and they do it right within the model by changing different factors that affect an entire system. And all kinds of insight comes out of that kind. And that's what I would propose to do. What if we were to take this beautiful model, this beautiful system of pastoring, shepherding, and we all of a sudden included this idea of chickens and a chicken farm and a chicken coop? What does it do to the model if we examine it that way? No, so I think, as I said, you know, the biblical model I think is beautiful, and there shouldn't be. So I don't think it's a matter of either or, but of both and. Keep these two models in your mind for a while. The sacred, biblical, ancient model and this inelegant, disquieting kind of, bothersome model of the chicken farm. Because they both, I think, offer revealing insights into the challenges and the elements of pastoring. So, one of the things that I've already suggested to you is, there is what I would call a structural maladjustment. Forgive again, if, I'm not trying to confuse you too much. What I mean by that is, that what I just said before, the structure of pastoring, the dynamic of pastoring, the mechanics of pastoring, the realities of pastoring have changed with the advent of 21st century modern culture, cities and family breakdown and the diversity of our cities, all these different elements coming in, the internet and so on and so forth. They have created a structural maladjustment because, the imagery of pastoring and so on is it's more than 2,000 years old. But the reality of the sheep and the sheepfold has dramatically changed. So, and for example, the image, the sheep see themselves very differently now. But the image and expectations of the pastor have barely changed. I remember this lady who told me once, she came to me. She's a very anointed woman, very prophetic and so on, but neurotic beyond belief. And usually the two go together, by the way. In my experience, I love the prophetic, by the way, and I more and more so. But there's a strange reality. There's a strange relationship between the two. And by the way, students of religion and psychology have studied that to no end. It's nothing new. There are strange affinities between these two things. But anyway, she came to me on a Sunday after the service and wanted an urgent appointment for counseling and conversation. Actually, she probably wanted to talk to me, not me to her. But I said to her, listen, I looked at my calendar and said, I'm sorry, for the next week I'm going on vacation. And I still remember the word says, but pastors don't take vacation. And she was totally serious about this. Los pastores no toman vacaciones, she said to me in Spanish. And so that's the whole thing. The image and expectations of the pastors have barely changed. We're still taught the pastor gives his life for his sheep, and to a certain degree that probably is so. We should be 24 hours a day available to our sheep, and they have an absolute claim on our life. And if we destroy our health and our marriage and our children, well, the better pastors we are. Praise God. If we die in the pulpit of a heart attack, man, what a hero of the faith. They'll remember that always. I dread that myself personally, But the image and expectations of the pastors have barely changed, and yet the demands and the understanding of the sheep, sheep see themselves very differently these days than they saw themselves 50, 100 years ago. I remember Rose Phillips. I know she's in heaven right now, probably looking upon me because I mentioned her name. Rose Phillips stayed in the same congregation something like 80 years. I'm serious. a woman of God, I mean, that you would not imagine. This congregation had gone through many, many different changes, including huge scandals, to the point that tourist groups used to come to the church and say, this is the congregation where the pastor killed his lover. and Rose Phillips stayed in that congregation, and she was buried in it. Praise God. Not literally in it, but by it, or whatever you want to call it. And you know, how many people do we remember like that? They stayed in one congregation through thick and thin. And that was the classical understanding. You know, you stayed in one congregation. Also, you lived in the same house for all your life many times. And you lived in the same town for years and years. And pastors stayed until, you know, they sort of dried up in the pulpit in one single congregation and were buried with honor and canonized, you know, in the mind of their sheep. But, you know, the fact is that, you know, this is a... So, you know, we have this idea still, the pastor gives his life for his sheep, but how about the sheep give their life for their pastor and their church? You know, that was the other half of the understanding. But that has changed now. So, you know, many modern congregations feel totally justified in firing a pastor for superficial reasons. He gave a bad sermon. Maybe we should talk to the elders about this guy. Or makes one gross mistake or whatever it is, and you know, that's it. So, you know, for many congregations, you know, it's a kind of a CEO corporation kind of mentality, and they will not say it that way, but they will start the keys, the machine running toward pushing that pastor out of the way. And you know, there are congregations that take that to an extreme degree. And the fact is that, you know, pastors, I think there was a poll done recently of how many pastors feel that they were pushed out of their congregation. And then the percentage was, at some point in their career, huge. How many feel that, you know, they were sort of irresistibly and subtly led out of the congregation by all kinds of signals that were given to them, very subtle. But they were all, the machinery, and the entire congregational machinery was activated to push this guy out and his family. They were not thrown out by giving a pink slip, but they were effectively. The slip was broken up into about 1,000 pieces and handed every week to him, one little bit at a time. And so, you know, many parishioners feel justified in changing churches at will also. You know, it's the kind of thing, hey, if my church, if the parking lot is getting too crowded, man, it's time for me to find another church. And if the kids' ministry is not what I want it to be, everything computerized and with the images of my child that I can see every moment as I'm looking at the sermon, you know, in the classroom, so I can monitor him, then you know, this is not the church for me. I'm going to look. And you know, churches are being kind of powerfully pushed into becoming this complex, multi-technological, multi-visual, you know, and pastors, CEOs who have absolute control of every secret of managing and administration and technology and marketing and, you know, modernity and so on. And that stuff is being, but you know, people, they you know, it's this idea, the church is a provider. I will pay for the services that they provide. They won't tell you that because nobody wants to see themselves that way, right? But ultimately, that is the real language that is operating in many churches today. And so, again, keep comparing the image of the pastor, the classical image, with this. So the sheep, you know, they feel, hey, man, in this case, it's a sheep's market. You know, the sheep have all the power and all the control. And pastors are, you know, slowly, I think what has happened is like with any structure, if you shift the places of burden, what happens? You have to shift to someplace else to maintain the structure. If you take any system and you change the loci of power, then it's you know, that strength needs to be redirected. And I think what has happened is that as the sheep have gained more and more power, more and more mobility, more and more freedom, the pastors have gotten less and less and less. Like in a marriage where one of the partners become more and more dominant, and what happens? The other one has to be slowly shrunk. That's what's happening to the church, by the way. The secular mentality is slowly acquiring more and more power, influence. And they say, hey, what's the problem? But it's because, you know, they're growing with this little boat, and they're growing stronger, stronger. And, you know, all of a sudden the other one, the church, is being pushed into the little corner. And when we complain, they say, hey, you're mean-spirited. You're narrow-minded. Yeah, I am in a narrow place, so I got to be narrow-minded. What do you want? I mean, there's not a limitless amount of power to be given to the different groups that make up an economy. So I think as the sheep have become more powerful, more dominant, more autonomous, the shepherds and their systems have become less powerful and weaker. But the reality doesn't change. Still the same expectations are on us, and more so. The expectations keep increasing, but the power and the agency and the authority keeps decreasing. And what happens when you have that kind of structural maladjustment? This inconsistency, which is, I think, mainly invisible and structural in nature, produces, I think, neurotic pastors in conflict with themselves.